So like under $100, the G400A seems like a decent option, huh? What? No, just get the All right, but what about the new Frame 4000D? Again, just get the Lian Li 207 is what everyone's been telling me when we review anything in its price category under $100. The 207, you say? This is supposed to be better in terms of design, features, build quality, and price to performance and airflow. It's a lot of boxes to fill. So in this video, let's compare the Lian Li 207 versus the Frame 4000D versus the G400A from Phanteks, because all of them are under $100. They seem to be a full package in terms of airflow, features, and everything that you might want to fit into the enclosure in a relatively decent budget category for hardware too. But Lian Li does have an edge in terms of reconfiguring the ATX layout to be slightly different to accommodate better GPU cooling. We'll definitely test on that. But in terms of design, this very much looks like a Lian Li enclosure, which is not a bad thing. But I do prefer the ventilation pattern that's more unique on the Corsair, although it's really flimsy. And I do like what Phanteks is doing as well in terms of that beautiful plastic fan shroud for the front and that triple fan array that follows. That looks awesome. Now Lian Li is also launching the 207 Digital, which is the same enclosure but with a screen at the bottom that's going to be able to display some time information, some system stuff, and this is a really awesome value add for an otherwise kind of like budget territory enclosure that can now literally do it all from a blink perspective and also compatibility perspective as well. Unfortunately, the unboxing experience is subpar. It is double boxed, which is awesome, but the interior padding, for example, is thinner than what Corsair and what Phanteks offers. I am hearing a little bit of a rattle. One of the plastic clips just fell out. I hope this is from the accessories and not from the frame. This is concerning. Genuinely worried about this part because the side panel is completely bowed out. But generally, I think there's nothing to worry about. Our accessory box just got opened. And so all the zip ties and little screw baggies fell out, which was probably the cause for all the rattling on the interior. And what I'm worried about more is actually the white model. Let me show you why. It seems like the accessory box is also very loose inside, but I'm just worried about the blades on this fan because they're completely missing. All right, I found the blades. Seems like having a giant zip tie holding our accessory box is not such a good idea, and it actually caused damage on both of my cases. My Corsair cases also came in slightly damaged, partially because they are only single box, which is unfortunate, although the padding on the interior is pretty good. The cause for damage were loosened thumb screws on the glass panel, which is the heaviest panel in the entire frame. So when it was loose, it was kind of bouncing around the frame and it caused some bending. So points detracted there for Corsair too. And fortunately, Phanteks is the only one that arrived fully intact, nothing damaged, it double boxed, great interior packaging. So points there for Phanteks for best packaging between these three. But Lian Li definitely takes the win when it comes to dimensions because they definitely restructured the ATX format to have a micro ATX footprint in terms of volume. So it is about 20% smaller than both the G400A and the Frame 4000D with almost non-existent case feet. So the case does look shorter versus the other two. And that also means that you cannot install a 360 or triple fan array at the front like you can with the Phanteks and the Corsair. But it does not detract from what it's capable of. Because of the whole bottom power supply reconfiguration, Lian Li is the only one to properly include bottom intake fans on our power supply shroud, but there's nothing underneath those fans, therefore giving us fresh air delivery for our GPU. And these are regular fans and not reverse fans for better performance and probably save on cost as well. While the G400A gives us some potential for airflow delivery for our GPU with three 120mm mounts, although the back one is completely blocked by the power supply, so it's useless. It's going to be mainly for visual purposes and cohesion with full side ventilation at the same time, so those fans can actually intake some of the air. And they're properly spaced out away from the motherboard as to not interfere with any of your I/O cables, for example, but it does block two rear PCIe slots. While the Corsair enclosure follows similar trends with a perforated shroud with two 120mm fan mounts with screws included that you can mount, although the back one is going to be useless because it is blocked by the power supply, which is why Lian Li's implementation here is way more practical. At least Corsair takes into account offsetting the fans to not interfere with our motherboard even further away than Phanteks, which is nice, but it still blocks our two bottom PCIe slots. And of course, you cannot mount a vertical GPU because that's where that would be mounted. If you are cooling with a 360 AIO, it's very likely to go to the top on all three enclosures just because we have front fans included in all three cases. And with the Frame 4000D, it's a very easy installation. Although with Lian Li's own Hydro AIO, it's a very tight fit at the top. But with my Phanteks AIO, this was really no fuss at all. 207 supports a 360 at the top, no problem, with the tubes facing forward. You can swap it with the tubes facing the back and still mount a rear 120mm fan. And we do have 140mm fan mounts, so you can mount dual 140s or a 280mm radiator at the top. And this being a slightly shorter enclosure, but it does not interfere with any of our motherboard components or any of our cooling in the front or the rear. And with the G400A being our tallest enclosure, absolutely no problem mounting a 360 AIO either with the tubes facing forward or the back. And unfortunately, neither of the enclosure has removable fan brackets for the top, so installation can be slightly more tricky versus something a bit more premium that has a removable bracket, for example. It is actually quite embarrassing on the Corsair, like how thin this metal is. Like, that's it. Right? Side panel ruined, and I applied almost no pressure. The Lian Li in comparison feels so much better. It's got really good density on the frame. Nothing is bending, nothing is creaking. And even though we have the perforation pattern that's the standard holes, with somewhat decent porosity, this thing is very solid. Not because the porosity is not very open, but because the actual thickness of the material is there. For a $79 enclosure, this puts the Corsair one to shame, and it feels quite on par with the Phanteks enclosure that is quite sturdy and perhaps not as dense, and there is a bit more plastic on the exterior and around. But otherwise, I don't have any shame recommending the Lian Li 207 or the G400A from a build quality perspective. The one major problem with the Phanteks enclosure when it comes to quality control are the fans. Don't get me wrong, the RGB illumination is gorgeous, and I love the fact that we do have that infinity mirror cap included at this price point, but it is the cap, when not placed properly at the factory, causes the fan to appear like it is wobbling. Phanteks told us they are upping their quality control at the factory, so this doesn't happen to you, but I've noticed this happen with their AIOs as well, so I'm not sure I can trust their word on it. So hopefully you don't get a lemon. The biggest drawback with Corsair would be the build quality, because from a feature point of view, it is fantastic. And as for the Lian Li, so the build quality is awesome, all the functionality is there, but I do have some minor complaints. Like the side panel, both of them are easily accessible with just a pull tab, but there's no way to secure them, and I feel like that's kind of a drawback, especially on the rear side panel where you might encounter thicker cables or like a bulge of cables that you might not be able to completely deal with, and you can't close the side panel because those tabs are quite light and they don't hold very well. Like, it is more difficult to remove the top panel than it is to separate your side glass, and I feel like the glass is already heavy and those push pins should have been beefier. The interior of the 207 is slightly more basic. You notice it has no eATX support because of this built-in cable cover. You cannot install anything larger than your standard ATX motherboard. It will not support BTF motherboards as well. The side cutouts are very large and open, and we also have a singular rubber grommet over here for our PCIe cables, just because we have a power supply over here without any cutouts, and fans over here with small cutouts underneath the motherboard. But if you want to cleanly route your PCIe cables, you very likely might use this or any of these side cutouts as well. I do like the built-in GPU support bracket with 3 positions and full vertical adjustment. I'm not a huge fan of how the power supply is revealed behind this perforation here, but it makes sense. You know, the power supply has to breathe and the fans have to intake air from the sides anyway. And over here we have that power supply cable extension, and you can see how much room we have there underneath. I do have some cables tucked away there, but this is normally would be covered by the power supply, but we have all this open room for those 2 fans to intake air for our GPU, and our power supply cable extension can easily be plugged in any direction, either facing up or facing down. I actually really like what Corsair did with the Frame 4000 because the interior is actually modular, so the cable cover can come out, the motherboard tray is removable if you like to install your motherboard and hardware outside of the frame. Your PCIe frame at the back is removable with just a few thumb screws and can be rotated vertically for vertical GPU installation. And it complements the whole InfiniRail system at the top and the front perfectly that would allow for some flexible hardware and easy installation in the future. The G400A, on the other hand, is a little bit more basic, but it is slightly more open, will accommodate eATX motherboards because of these additional rubber grommets on the side. It will support BTF motherboards, of course, with clever cable cutouts around the motherboard tray, but otherwise it is what it is for the last 10 years, you know? I find cable management in the 207 perfectly fine, even though it's a little bit unconventional, but relocating the power supply to the front, as long as you do not exceed the length of the power supply to be 160 millimeters, you're perfectly fine bunching up the cables in front of it and all over here. Right above the power supply, we have this very deep cavity with 3 Velcros that you can apply tension to certain cables, and everything is, you know, nicely cleaned up. This is perfectly fine. And because of the power supply reconfiguration, we do have 2 drive caddies underneath those shroud fans for either 2.5 or 3.5 inch drives. And on the inside, I do like this hidden cutout in front of our fans to route our PCIe cables. And the rest of the interior is managed well. I do like how recessed the motherboard is to give us higher CPU tower clearance and higher GPUs, but I don't like how open these cutouts are on side of the motherboard. And you might actually be better using this rubber grommet to route your 24 pin because that might look better. While the Phanteks enclosure clean up really well on the interior, lots of room for cables, etc., but I hate the side panels and how they close, making them really difficult to work with, especially if you have any bulges on the other side of that frame. However, the rubber grommets are excellent, and we have 2 captive motherboard standoffs that makes motherboard installation way easier. The frame 4000D handles cable management just fine. The cable cover has 2 positions in case you need to extend it for eATX motherboards, and we have the Velcro straps to guide your large cables. I love these additional Velcro straps at the rear that can extend outside of the frame to, let's say, help guide your USB cable or something, while the main Velcro straps could be slightly longer to apply better tension, but otherwise it is perfectly fine. And as for cooling, on the CPU side, it performs very well, on par with the G400A. Those front fans are excellent, they move a lot of air, and the reason why the Frame 4000D is so much hotter, I mean, not that much hotter, but still hotter, is because those front fans are kind of As for the GPU side of things, in my configuration, because we don't have any extra exhaust, it doesn't perform that much different versus the Phanteks or the Corsair enclosures. So if you want any better temperatures on the GPU side, definitely make sure to install a rear exhaust fan. Now, to say you'll be happy with either of them has some weight to it, but the Corsair enclosure, for example, has excellent features and awesome compatibility with hardware, but the build quality is embarrassing, and I'm gonna give them some praise when they actually deliver on the promised accessories and modules in the future. Also, let's see how much they will cost. The Phanteks enclosure at $99, I would say, is a great value, but many people pointed out this feels like a $59/$69 enclosure with extra value-added RGB fans, and yes, that's pretty much exactly what it is. And as long as you don't get the wobbling center infinity mirror cap fan, you'll be fine. And the Lian Li at $79, it is absolutely incredible value for the durability, for the density of the enclosure, and all the ATX compatibility that you normally would find on cases that are much larger. Also, the I/O is superior on both the Lian Li and the Phanteks just because it is accessible in a normal location at the top, while the Corsair, everything here is at the bottom. Really difficult to access, especially if you have the case underneath the desk. And so the catch with the 207 is actually its price. I have not seen it being sold for $79. It's always $89, $99 and above. I'm guessing because of its popularity and how much it kind of outweighs the competition in its value launch price, but points deducted because it's hard to find it at its launch $79 price. But otherwise, easy recommend for me. Easy recommend still with the G400A. You know, find it on sale and hopefully you don't get wobbling fans. And Corsair, I would say give them one more generation. But I would love to hear your thoughts. I'm Dmitry. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you in the next video.